For the women in the room, I need your backup and support on some of the things I'm going to talk about tonight. I need you to help me. If you're a woman, please raise your hand. I want to see what the percentage is for the women. Now, I need your backup and support when I talk about some of the research and its findings, what it means, and I need you to call out collectively, yes or no, as a group of women, that what I'm talking about actually happens to you in real life. Now, the reason I need this, because a lot of these gentlemen in this room, when they hear some of this, will say they couldn't possibly be true or right because it never happened to me. Now, for the women, assuming that you agree with what I'm saying, can I get your support on this as a group? Thank you. For example, your typical male in this room, and in fact the typical male in your life, has no idea if you go to a function like this or a party where there are 50 couples, this is a test size, you're the last couple through the door. It takes your average woman around 11 minutes in that room to have figured out the relationship between every couple in that room. Yes or no? Most men have difficulty with this. In a room like this with no windows where you've entered for the first time, one thing we did find is that most men can sense the direction of north and point towards it. This is a very important skill. Now, less than half the amount of women can do the same task. Now, in simple terms, most men can sense north. Most women have difficulty. Why would men be able to sense north? Obviously, there's some advantage to this. I'll come back and explain that. For the women in the room, what I'm going to say now will be a shock to you. But men's brains are a fairly simple mechanism compared to yours. Looking at brain scans and the way they now reveal how we behave, give some deep insights into our behaviour, particularly into women's intuition. This strange thing has existed for thousands of years. The first thing you notice about male brains, and when I say male or man or masculine, I'm talking here about most men, most of the time, most of this applies. About 4 out of 5 men across the board is about your average. And most women, most of the time, it mostly applies. There are no absolutes. You can judge which applies to you in your life. Men's brains are more organised. When you scan them, you notice that everything has its place. So if you can picture for this exercise, it's like he's got little rooms all over his head. And each room has at least one major function that works well in isolation of the rest. Women's brains tend to have functions spread more often on both sides, and often front and back. In the case of speech and language, it's both sides, front and back, and at the back. The connecting cord between the left and right, the corpus callosum, on average for a typical woman, runs around 10% thicker physically and carries up to 30% more connections between the left and right. Now, this gives women what we call a multitasking brain. In simple terms, gentlemen, that means that your typical woman that you would meet in your life can perform somewhere between 2 and 4 simultaneous unrelated tasks. For the women, is this true, yes or no? For example, she can run an internet program, talk on a headset to somebody in a foreign country about an unrelated program, be listening to a third party having a conversation and drinking tea. Multitasking. Now, most men's brains, with less connections and more neater arrangement, can do, and I'll tell you this, they can do one thing at a time. Now, the women in the room, you've heard a man say, look, I can do one thing at a time. He's not being rude, he's being actually correct. Now, he can do it very, very well, by the way. Real well. But one thing. For example, if a typical male pulls over to the side of the road to read a street directory because he's not lost, he's finding a new way. He pulls out his map or directory. What is the first thing most men will do with the radio? They turn it off. Now think about this. He turns the radio off to read a map. Does that make sense to you? Well, if you could scan his brain, you'd probably get a clue to this. He can't operate navigation and hearing simultaneously. He can do one or the other. If he's driving down the motorway and you talk with him, he misses the turn off. On a roundabout, you talk, he gets the wrong turn, you get the blame. Now, understanding one thing at a time mentality is a very important key for women to understanding any male in your life. So we're going to talk about excellence in relationships and how well can you sell yourself to other people. And on an increasing basis today, in every business, how often can you sell yourself to the opposite sex, get cooperation and get a yes to what you propose? Now, this one thing at a time mentality. Most of the men in this room, you've had, from an evolutionary standpoint, a fairly clear job description. Nobody's argued the point until recently. Now, in simple terms, we describe men as lunch chasers. This is your job. For a long time, your job has been to find a target and hit it. So you get up in the morning and off you go looking. So it makes sense that your brain would have evolved with abilities to allow you to pick up a target in the distance, estimate coordinates. How far away is it? How fast is it moving? If I caught this thing, how big would it be when I got there? At the speed I'm going, at this angle, and the angle it's going, how fast do I go to head it off at the pass? How far do I bring my arm back with a rock or stick of this size? And when do I release it at this speed to hit a moving zebra at 50 metres? This is called visual spatial awareness. Now, scans show that it sits for most men in the right part of the brain and across the back, left and right visual brain. It's the number one brain skill for most men in virtually every culture. Now, it's a skill that most women do not need. The reason being, as the childbearer of this species, your brain is organised for different skills and abilities. Hitting targets, long-distance navigation are not two of them. You don't need to be able to do that. You need other things, but they're not two of them. So the guy's out there, he hits the target, now he needs to sense north. The purpose of this? To get home. If you're going to be a long-distance navigator, you need to be able to sense direction to get back, otherwise you're a waste of time. So he gets back home with his lunch, throws it down, he lies about how hard it was to catch. And then for the rest of the night, he just gazes in the fire. That's it. In simple terms, male job description. Find a target, estimate coordinates, hit it with a rock. Find north, lie a bit, and fire gaze. Now, men's brains, you fellas, your brains are organised to do these things. Now, fire gazing for modern men can happen at any time of the day. Most women will recognise that certainly early evening involving newspapers, magazines, or remote controls. Now, here's a typical man fire gazing at the end of the day. He's reading information, magazine, or a book. If you could scan his brain while he's doing this, you know what you'd discover? He's hearing impaired. He's technically deaf for using old, politically incorrect terms. Now, for the women, this is important to understand. Men's brains are organised, they can speak or listen. Fellas, is this true or not? Speak or listen. We can speak or listen. Most of us cannot do both. This is why when men talk with other men, they have turns. So if there's myself and these two gentlemen in front talking, just on a non-threatening basis, I might go first, I'd have my turn. They would actually let me have the turn. They would not attempt to talk simultaneously. I get to the end, and as I'm talking, they do just what they're doing now. They go completely blank and they go... This is men showing, I'm interested. I get to the end, and then he'd have his turn, and we go, huh. Huh. Then this gentleman would have a turn with, This is men bonding, getting on very well. How do women talk with other women? Simultaneously. They're all going at the same time. Now, women are the butt of jokes of this from men in every country. Men say in every country. We go to up to 30 countries in a year, and you can hear the men at meetings like this say, listen to the women because you can hear them, all talking at the same time. And the men say, no one's listening. Fellas, that's not true. If you could scan their brains, you would discover their brains can speak and listen simultaneously. For the women, is this true? Yes or no? Now, for most men, this is a difficult concept to get your head around. Speaking and hearing at the same time. Not only can they do that, they can do it on several unrelated subjects. They can also do this in one sentence. Now, women operate on 5 tones of voice, of which men can identify 3. Men operate on 3 tones. So a woman will start off on subject 1, halfway through without apparent notification. She introduces a second subject. Now, the women listening realise by the tone of voice, here's a second subject. Most of the men think, this is the same subject. Now they start thinking, what is she talking about? Now she brings in a third subject, goes back to the first. The women know 3 things were being discussed. Is this true, gals? You look at the faces on the men, they're thinking, what is going on in this group? Now, if they know you well, they might say, what are you talking about? Or something very subtle like this. Now, from a nest defending standpoint, being the childbearer, it means that your brain would need to have the abilities to allow you to defend territory and offspring at close range. Long-distance navigation, target hitting is not relevant. You need a number of other skills. First, being able to multitask with both hands would be a big advantage from a gathering standpoint. You could pick at twice the rate. If, like most men, like 93% of men, you're dominant only with your right hand, which is your hitting throwing arm, tie that in with your spatial skills, there's your lunch chaser. That means if you're going to do that in gathering, you're going to be limited. So you don't need a spot in the left brain to identify the right hand like most men. In fact, nearly half women don't have a spot on either side to identify either hand. They cannot tell left from right in simple terms. And boy, do they get stick from men about this. You don't even know your left from right, Cheryl. Well, no. Successful nest defending doesn't need that. You don't need a dominant arm. You need to be able to multitask equally. There are far more ambidextrous women than men. And women have several other advantages. I mean, anatomically our eyes are the same. Men's eyes are slightly larger. Women have more white of the eyes. White of the eyes is a communication tool. But what your brain software lets your brain see is very different. Now, if you picture most of the males in your life that you know, now it doesn't matter whether he's 5 years of age or 65, the principle's the same, has a form of mild tunnel vision. Most men can see far better than women and test to be better at seeing targets directly in front over long distances. Peripherally, most men it's all the blur out here, we can't see much at all, but we can see that fly on the wall back there. Tie that in with your dominant right arm and your spatial skills. There's your lunch chasing machine. This is his job. Now, the advantage of that, of course, he can see a target undistracted. The downside is he can't find things in refrigerators, cupboards, drawers. Every woman in this room has recently had a conversation with a male. He's standing in front of an open refrigerator. See if you recognise it. Where's the butter? It's in the refrigerator. Well, no, it's not. I'm standing here looking now and there's none here. Raise your hand if you have had this conversation. Now, he insists it's not there. You walk into the kitchen, you thrust your arm in the refrigerator, and right in front of his face at eye level is this gigantic tub of butter. Now, there's no cultural differences we found in any responses to this at all. The only cultural difference we did find is that Eskimo women can reverse parallel park a sled and point north. Now, for thousands of years, they've been hunters similar to the male, so it makes sense that they would have evolved with those skills. Now, a typical woman has a peripheral vision that operates at least 60 degrees from the side of the head. Now, most men start laughing when they hear this. Many can see up to 180 degrees, and a small percentage can see slightly behind while appearing to look directly in front. For the women, is this true? Yes or no? Tell them. Now, for most men, this is getting too much. You try to tell me, Alan, that she's talking to the gentleman on the front table. While she's talking with him, she can see all the people around him at the same time. Yes, and she can hear what they're all talking about and tell you tomorrow what they were wearing. A multi-tracking brain allows you to do that. See, it allows you to pick up stimulation and information in your area about other people and animals. So while you're multitasking in front, you can see a person or animal approaching or sneaking up on the nest either side. Now, this peripheral vision, fellas, is a bit of a clue for you. Kinsey Institute in America, who study human sexuality, they found this is the reason women do not get caught having a good old look at men on the beach. She seems to be looking there, but she's looking at this guy here. Now, when you come into a room like this, you're with a man, right? And you say to him, without appearing to move your lips, you say, look at that couple over by the exit sign. What's the first thing he does with his head? Women say to men everywhere, stop looking, it's so embarrassing. You're so obvious. Now look, if he doesn't turn his head, he cannot see anybody. It's that simple. You're walking down along the beach, fellas. You've got a woman walking beside you, and coming out of the water over here on an angle is absolutely beautiful-looking woman with the best-shaped figure you have ever seen. Now, you haven't seen it yet because you're watching that seagull landing on top of that lamppost up in front. Who spots her first, you or the woman with you? Women know the answer to this. You spot her long before he's got a clue what's happening. Then you evaluate her as a competitor out of 10, marking yourself down. And when you've finished that form of self-beating, then you look at him and wait till he sees her. When he goes, you dirty mongrel in public! The visual spatial area of the brain. This the right part, which exists for the majority of men. From age 2 onwards, men and boys test to be very strong in visual spatial skill. It also means that you can look at information three-dimensionally. You can see height and width, and you can see the third dimension. You can see behind an object. This allows you in your mind to mentally imagine something rotated upside down. Now, mental rotation is a very strong part of male hunting brain. You can also go three-dimensionally this way. This would explain why 94% of all air traffic controllers in the world are men, wouldn't it? Why 98.1% of all air traffic crews in the world in commercial airlines, pilots and engineers, are males. Not sexist. We went down to see the air traffic controllers, as we did with most major spatial occupations, and we said, hey, where are the women? Why aren't they here? Where's this equal opportunity? You know why there aren't more women air traffic controllers and pilots? They don't apply for the jobs. You know why? They're not interested. They couldn't care less. It wouldn't occur to your typical younger a student today as a female to apply for a job as an air traffic controller. It wouldn't make sense. They wouldn't even suit the job. In fact, you've got to have spatial skills to even be interested. Does that make sense? It's not that they're no good at it. They're not interested. They orient their careers into other areas where their brains are really more suited, and they find it more interesting, such as 86% of all therapists and counsellors in Britain are